Our goal is to knowledge share with the audience on how to reach predictable outcomes from an unpredictable channel. We're going to start really from a high level perspective, and it makes the most sense to lay a foundation with data. So we will do just that. Then from there, Christina Mariani May is going to walk us through the journey of a bottle of Chianti Superiore, all the way from the winery to port. And then Allison will help us better understand how that wine goes from the port in Europe over to the United States, and how that port process has been impacted today, or that journey has been impacted today, with all the supply chain challenges. And then Dina Opici is going to help us better understand from a distributor perspective, once that product reaches the port, how does it then make it all the way to the consumer at the end of the day?
For so many years, we've been in a place of overcapacity, and we talk about resilience in the supply chain, and resilience actually has been there because there has been more capacity, more supply than demand in terms of ship space and containers. We are absolutely flip-flop right now. What we're seeing right now with these incredible delays and congestion, you might deliver a container of wine into the port of Livorno, but the 3 vessels that are coming in while your containers there are overbooked. The steamship lines do not necessarily care that your container is full of wine that could cook in the heat, and containers are getting left behind both at the mother port, shall we say, as well as transshipment ports. So again, from Europe, a lot of the routes are direct, especially into the East Coast. But if you're coming out of Chile or Australia or New Zealand, you are going to be transshipping somewhere along the way, and you also risk leaving your cargo at that transshipment port. This life of an import, the anatomy of an import, and what your logistics provider should be doing for you, and whether you're RNDC or Opici or Banfi, almost all of the companies in beverage alcohol work with logistics providers. Wine and spirits and beer, they're still agricultural products. There's a lot of complexity. There's also a huge amount of regulation in the USA. So there has to be a middleman who is really coordinating these efforts. So most of you will hire a logistics company to move your cargo. And that logistics company gets involved right from the point of PO. And that purchase order should have things like your terms of sale and your requested ship date and all the details that you want your provider to know about your purchase order. And the logistics provider is also a buffer. They're going to review that PO. They're going to make sure the terms of sale match what they believe either the producer or the importer agreed to. They're going to look to make sure that it will comply with customs regulations. And they're also often going to be the party that really gets you the true readiness date. Again, right now, the situation is that suppliers are screaming that the logistics providers are not getting their product picked up. It's not just, say the Gory warehouse that's packed, it's the suppliers' warehouses. They want to move their product. These are many times small farms. They don't have huge warehouse spaces, and logistics provider is saying, look, there's just no containers, or there's no bookings for 3 weeks. We don't want to load your container and then have it sit. So there's a ton of communication that is absolutely essential to the process. A lot of it is done via web portals and whatnot, but right now a heck of a lot of it is done via email, via phone, just communication on every little detail. So the logistics provider ultimately is the one that gets that container loaded, gets it booked with the steamship line, communicates all of those various regulatory pieces of data that honestly have been in place since 9/11, that there were so many regulations that went into place for security. So we talk in acronyms, whether ISF, Importer Security Filing, and AMS, Automated Manifest Transmission, and ISPS, International Port Security. We could speak a whole different language in the logistics world, but all of these items need to get taken care of to make sure your product gets on the ship, gets cleared through customs when it arrives, and smoothly goes through the supply chain. As said, nothing is really smooth right now because of the massive congestion. And I think the next slide just talks a little bit about some of the reasons, for the congestion, and as we said, the perfect storm. And so many different things have affected the industry. And I think in 2020, we would have said the biggest stress points were the tariff situation and the uncertainty of CBMA, Craft Beverage Modernization Act, And then, of course, when COVID hit, all of that almost seems in the rearview window right now, up in terms of what we're up against right now with basically what we would say a complete global meltdown in shipping and the bounce back of the economy. But nobody expected this incredible surge of import cargo starting from Asia as China reopened and started manufacturing again. And then basically this incredible buying binge that the US public has been on, and a surge that was just absolutely unprecedented. So this has impacted really everybody across the globe. And when you think about just the containers themselves, and hopefully none of yours have fallen off a ship the way this photo is, but container manufacturing is all done in China. That shut down when China locked down during COVID. So all of those orders that would have normally been placed for just the containers themselves were not placed. There's finally, empty containers that are being built and coming online. So there are some things that will ease this pressure, but as said, we're working at about 120% capacity. And so almost every area of the world has been affected at this point in terms of either lack of equipment or lack of space on vessels. The other thing that has happened that is just incredibly dramatic, more dramatic than in my 30 plus years in shipping, are the price increases. Again, this is something that I think Dina will talk about too, as the trickle down of the supply chain crisis is hitting across the board in terms of potential inflation and raising of prices. But a container from Italy to New York a year ago, maybe you were paying $1,700, just ballpark figure. If you can get that on a ship for under $4,000 right now, you're pretty lucky. The steamship lines from Europe to USA are getting upwards of $7,000, $8,000, $9,000 a container. It is like, our job in the logistics is like, booking a seat on an airplane. Right now, those seats are at auction and, going to the highest bidder. So we all in the logistics sector, we have these contracts, we have commitments from the steamship lines. Those carriers are not meeting their commitments. There's a lot of complaints being lodged with the Federal Maritime Commission, and in general, shipping public is reacting very strongly to these issues, but there's very little enforcement that the US government can do on this. This is just a lovely shot of a terminal in Los Angeles. This one isn't New York, but it gives you a sense of the overcrowding of terminals. These are just containers stacked on the terminal. It's impossible to maneuver in there. Your trucker goes in, they're trying to pick up your shipment that's cleared customs and it's ready. And they say, sorry, your container's in a closed area. We can't get to it today. Trucker has to leave, comes back the next day. Maybe he's waited 6 hours in line to get that answer. It is just impossible working environment. And it's I think the more education that we can provide on this, at least this can trickle down again to all the different parties. So when you tell your restaurant or your retailer or grocery store that we don't have this product, it's not because you have not done your due diligence, it's because the situation is out of control.
So I'm thrilled to have the opportunity to work with Jen, my fellow WLC advisory board member, on crafting today's agenda and sharing the screen with this fabulous group of women. So where do we fit as a wholesaler in the process? As a wholesaler, we sit in the middle of the three-tier system. We have to manage the challenges and the opportunities from both sides, the suppliers and the retail and restaurant marketplace. And it's fair to say that many days it feels like we're managing chaos, right? But since 2019, there's no question we have certainly had our fair share of challenges. And it started with imports, really with the imposition of tariffs. It shook the market and it had a real impact, especially on the on-premise segment, where the gatekeepers were forced to make changes in order to continue to provide affordable options for their customers. And then as we rounded into 2020, then came COVID. And we have had plenty of conversations on COVID and the pandemic and the impact on our businesses and our individual markets. So we're going to fast forward to 2021 and get beyond the pandemic, because the best news for imports coming into 2021 was that the tariffs had been suspended. And there was real light at the end of the tunnel, right? Vaccines had arrived, restaurants were reopening, marketplaces were reopening across the country. And we could look to get imports positioned again for success. And then we hit the perfect storm, and no pun intended, Allison, with regards to the ship going sideways, but demand was increased and supply was unavailable. And this shortage stemmed from several areas. First, we had continued international shutdowns throughout the end of 2020 and the beginning of 2021 in Europe, which led to a lack of production. So part of the issue we're feeling right now is that we're still catching up, right, to production from the wineries and distilleries overseas. And then we had delays in shipment as a result of that lack of production. So whereas you used to put an order in and expect it to ship within 3 weeks, now production's taking, and then you're still waiting for it to ship. And then ultimately, as Allison explained, we have an overall slowdown in the transportation process due to a lack of equipment. But I will say that as a wholesaler, the difference between the challenges of 2019 with tariffs and the challenges now is that today's challenges aren't tangible, right? We knew what the tariffs were. We had notice of them, albeit short, but we reacted to them. We could make the changes we needed to in our own business environment to be able to ensure that we were capturing those costs, whether they were to us, to our suppliers, or to our customers, and ultimately the consumers. The current challenges present a surprise every day. And as Allison said, on any given day, different opportunities surface. We've gotten calls saying we have 10 vessels that are ready to leave with 10 spots on them if you can give us orders in the next 2 hours. You know, that's a very difficult way to manage your business. And it's not a welcome one because it's led by surcharges, it's led by out of stocks, and ultimately massive frustration within our own organization, with our customer base and our suppliers. And because of all this, we're seeing freight costs increase over 30% from last year. But again, on any given day, we're potentially guessing, right? The increases were 10%, then they were 20%. We're now at 30%. And I think the question is, where are they going to go? So what do we do as a wholesaler who's trying to start a new relationship or find success with a current relationship with an importer? At this point, we can only plan ahead. And I'm not saying to you that it's a pretty process, but we really need to reset our expectations right now. Goods that used to take 30 days to get to our warehouse are now taking 90, and that's domestically. Goods that used to take 60 days to get to our warehouse internationally are now taking 120 days. So we need to adjust our lead times, and we need to adjust our needs, and we really need to adjust our expectations, because what was no longer is. And we've been tested on this many days, many times, in many ways over the past year. But we really need to change our approach to how we start a new relationship with an importer or how we continue to plan for success with current partners. And we need to be responsible in our approach to pricing, because as you all know, who are in the wholesale business, we cannot make changes unilaterally. We're subject to price filing requirements, and that many of those have a large time window ahead of them. The reality is that the reduction of the tariffs is really going to have no impact on the pricing of imports due to the fact that our costs of doing business have increased. And in some cases, more so than the tariffs. As a wholesaler, we are funding those increases because they happen well before the goods get to the consumer. So I feel like we've spent a lot of doom and gloom today. and obviously there's areas that we can focus on. But we also need to appreciate that we are in a growing industry and we are going through pains due to the challenges of the global economy. And we need to ensure we're actively communicating this to our employees and to our customers, because the wine and spirits will be here at some point and we will be ready to get them to market. And like Allison mentioned, we need everyone to understand where we are in that process and that it's not due to a lackadaisical approach. Everyone is involved in trying to make sure that we are getting product to our warehouses and to our customers as quickly as possible. But until we can get to the point where we have goods to get to market to be able to fulfill currently the needs, we will continue to look for opportunities for new relationships, as well as foster the partnerships we have, because ultimately we need to adjust to the responsibility that we have and be thoughtful in our approach for the long term. So I think that, from my perspective as a wholesaler, I look back 2 years ago and I'm like, God, it was easy. Because you could start a relationship, or you could sit down and plan at the beginning of the year for your needs, and you had visibility. And you had what I would say fair expectations of when you would get those goods and how you would take them to market. And right now that's somewhat out the window. And I think my big word for 2020 was nimble. If you weren't nimble as an organization, you couldn't be successful. And COVID was kind to the alcohol beverage industry, but it took a lot more than that to be successful in 2020 as an organization. And I don't know what a stronger word is than nimble, but it applies to 2021 because every day you're getting something new thrown at you that you need to react to in a different way than you did before. And all of that involves every aspect of a wholesaler, because there's impacts operationally, there's impacts financially, and there's impacts from a sales standpoint. So, you love to be able to isolate those things and say it's only one area's problem, but it impacts everyone. And so that's why, to me, it's so important that we make sure that we're communicating at all times what is happening, despite the fact that it's not always a lot of fun to be the messenger.
No doubt. Dina, I think I really appreciate you providing that really holistic overview from a distributor standpoint, and touching on so many different aspects, including things that we can do differently, as you say, in the doom and gloom environment. But there are things that we, in fact, can control. But I think one of the overarching questions that I'm sure is on everybody's mind, and I do want to touch base with Allison on this, is, Allison, from your perspective and from that global overview, is there any end in sight? What is that prognosis? And I know we touched on kind of the pricing a little bit, but maybe we should dig in a little deeper on that aspect. And, how does this look 6, 12, 18, 24 months from now, and even further? What is that long-term implication?
Definitely the $1 million question these days, when is this going to end? It certainly is a cycle, but I will say in the shipping industry, and again, most of you don't live and breathe it, but the panorama of carriers, of providers, has shrunk dramatically. So we've gone from, say, 30 ocean carriers to about 13, and just 3 alliances. So these companies are getting much better, and I'll use the word nimble here, much more nimble in terms of shrinking capacity the minute there is an overcapacity situation. So we saw this a bit, during COVID, and even back, a couple of years ago, as some volumes dropped, they'll pull out a vessel string, or what they call layup vessels. They'll take a vessel out. So as much as I say this is a cycle and there will be an end to this massive surge, the question is, when. The expectation is at the earliest beginning of Q4. But I think more realistically, we are going to be living with this throughout 2021. And I think things will start to normalize near the end of the year. There will be consumer spending on services and travel and tourism, as opposed to just goods. That is an expectation, that this surge of inventory and everybody trying to get product on the shelves, that will calm down. But we aren't even in what is the normal peak season. And peak season for the consumer goods industry tends to come in late summer and early fall, pre-holiday, back to school, those type of things. So I don't predict any relief in the short term. But what I will be kind of wondering about, as we do normalize and there's, the bookings become, steady, and each vessel is actually able to accommodate the amount of cargo that is booked on it, whether or not carriers will maintain the very greedy outlook that they've had and pull capacity the minute there does seem to be overcapacity, and keep these rates high. That's kind of the unknown. When there were more carriers, there would always be one of them that would tumble. They would be, opportunistic and say, I'm going to drop my rates by 50% and I'm going to get all this new business. With fewer competitors, that is not as likely to happen. So we may be entering a period where the prices are just going to remain higher in shipping for a much longer time than ever before. And hopefully not at these levels. And I will say, as Dina was saying, the unpredictability, the surcharges, every day there's announcements, every day there's carriers sending out, and they're not talking $100, $200 additional. They're talking $1,000. They're talking $2,000. So these are not small increases, and there's no regulation there. I mean, it is the market forces. Nobody can tell them that they're not allowed to charge $10,000 a container. They can charge whatever they want, whatever the market will bear. So I just think we do need to be prepared for a pretty long haul of this situation. And the same thing in the US, that the terminals, as we see, aren't set up to take these massive ships. They could handle it when the ships weren't full. Now that the ships are full, you saw that picture of the terminals, it takes days to unload a ship. The vaccinations and return to full workforce of labor unions and longshoremen, that will help a little bit. So there's a lot of little things that will help ease this. Truck drivers getting back on the road, people's unemployment running out, and maybe joining the workforce and driving trucks again. So little rays of hope, but I'd say just be cautious for the next year.
Christina and Dina, I think it would be wonderful to hear kind of your perspective on the next steps, and as we sit here kind of as a linked group in our universe of alcohol beverage, Christina and Dina, how can we better facilitate and work together to try to overcome these obstacles day in and day out from each of your perspectives?
I mean, Dina, if you want me to start, I mean, having just jumped off a call with all my sales directors, one thing we need to do is communication. We've gotten much better at communication using technology. One thing we're doing with our buyers and with our wholesalers is asking kind of in advance, what programs are you planning? What big dips or buys are you planning on? What do we hope to get? Because we used to just kind of assume and build that into our projections. And now what we're seeing is it's so hard to project and predict. So we don't want to overload inventory. We got to move it around the country. And we don't really have great trends coming out of COVID. So we have to look back. But honestly, it's a new buying pattern. So one of the things we're recommending to our team, it's more and more communication of, I think this is coming. I need it in this market. Can you share? Can you give up your market share of it? And if we do that, it's going to help us a lot better. And communicating back to our customers, as you were saying, this isn't necessarily that our company or your Mr. Wholesaler, Mrs. Wholesaler can't sell it, is that this is a global issue. Be patient with us. And if we need to push programs back, because we've been asking questions like Allison's been answering, how much time do you need? What's the worst case scenario time-wise? Okay, if we're going to launch a product, we're not going to launch it in September. We wanted to launch it July. We're not going to launch it in September. It's just too crazy. So we're going to have to hold it off for next year. So we need to make those decisions now, and we kind of plan for the worst and hope for the best, put it that way. Dina, what are your thoughts on it?
Well, so I was going to say Allison's just got to figure it out.
I wish it were that simple, Allison.
In the meantime, I'm kidding, Allison. In the meantime, no, I think everything you said, and what I would add to that is we can't make assumptions, right? So, I mean, I think in the past, like I said, we've been able to make decisions because we were conditioned to this is how it worked. This is how it went. And all of that's been thrown out the window. And I know we're talking about imports, but it applies domestically too. And so, I think that, communication is so important within our own organizations. So people have visibility. So when they're talking with their, whether that be a supplier or a retailer or a restaurateur, they're giving them the best possible information, because the frustration level is just very high. And the good news is there's good things going on around us, right? Our communities are improving, and we're seeing more activity, and so we have all these good things going around us, and now we have like this new blemish. So I think, again, I appreciate the new word of the year somebody put in the chat, agile, because you're 100% correct. It's not just about being able to bob and weave, but to be thoughtful in how you do it. So so from that standpoint, I just think that our approach has been that we can't, the norm, we love this word, right? The norm does not exist for the way we approached our business for imports in the past, and we need to adjust accordingly.
I just want to throw one quick thing out there too. Like we've been really focusing on Europe and the difficulty there, but it isn't the same in every country. And there are countries that are less affected. And I think, we talked internally about like Chile to the US East Coast. Not that bad. Rates have not gone crazy. There's still, you can ship almost every week without a problem. So it isn't completely global. It may happen later in Chile, but there's areas that are not as impacted. So when you talk about planning and looking at your products, and you're all global players here, there can be some supplementing from perhaps the countries that you actually can move products. So that's another thing where it isn't completely universal. Mexico's another area. Yeah, it's maybe congested on the border, but tequila is going crazy, and you can still move the tequila pretty well, whether it's ocean or truck. So it's just interesting in terms of looking at the various lanes and then trying to juggle that, like you said, because it could change by the week, but trying to find the new normal is not easy. But there are pockets that are actually working pretty well.